Hello everyone, I'm Forrest McFreelava, and this is Speedplay Italy in Hearts of Iron 3, number 13. We left off having completed Operation Summer Storm, which actually went quite a bit beyond what we had anticipated. The Germans are still collapsing, however we made great gains. Nothing's really going on in any other front, except the Americans are pressing really far in India. Now we're going to begin Operation Volgar, which is our attempt to press forward to the Volga River and also this river right in front of us, which I'm pretty sure now is not actually the Volga. At any rate, we're going to try to make some decent levels of gains throughout the area, try to encircle as many Soviet troops as we can, and generally just do as much damage as is possible with the forces we have available. We've learned that the Ukrainian front is much more difficult than we'd anticipated, so we're probably not going to focus on it very much, if at all. And generally, we're just going to use these forces, which are already proving very successful, and just continue to break through. Now, one of our infantry groups is being attacked by a large number of enemy forces, so we're going to defend the areas around them in order to bring the enemy forces away from them. And we're actually facing a lot of success just gunning it straight forward into these armies. So, in fact, we may be putting a lot of focus onto that area. We're also having a bit of an issue with our troops maybe getting encircled over in the western part of this theater and this front. So we may have to deal with that, although it's really up in the air. These forces are definitely not in a great spot. You'll see they are losing some of these battles, however, they're winning the battles around them. Ultimately, it may not be the most dangerous of things, but we are going to focus mainly on just trying to encircle these enemy units and hopefully not losing everything around them in the process. These forces are going to just keep swarming around, as it looks as though we don't even need to bother with encirclements. We might just be able to beat them and then race them to the provinces they're going to go to. And honestly, at this point, that might work just as well. We are also going to attempt a naval landing, which, interestingly enough, seems as though it would be right out of Operation Deportation from the beginning of this, but that is probably going to take just a moment as we need to get our Marines ready to go. These forces continue to breach forward through the Soviet lines, and really it looks as though we're going to just win out loud here. The Marines are ready to go, so we get these forces all together and we're going to just drop them off. Everyone else is still just making great gains. And we drop most of our forces off on that one province, with the mechanized infantry going to the one to the left. These armies are going forward as quickly as they possibly can. The Germans are losing some ground, nothing too terrible, and we are making decent progress. Most of the Soviet forces here are trapped or destroyed. And there we go, we've just cleaned up that entire area. There are a few encircled elements of the enemy army, but nothing really too major. And we're just going to flow around any point of resistance, because we may as well. It's not as though they're really that much of a threat when we encircle them, especially since we have just so many men in the field compared to them. These forces are going to just continue north and around. Everyone else is just going to continue in a large circle around the Soviet forces. We add another war goal, and that's just for Western Russia, I believe. These forces continue to move around in an attempt to just get behind and encircle every Soviet soldier that we see on this front. There are some victory points, really nothing to our east for miles and miles and miles, so we're not going to go east. Mainly we'll just focus on moving west, eventually connecting up to Crimea and eventually maybe Ukraine, and going north and carving a path through the Soviet Union. All of these forces are really just getting ready to move throughout. There are some major cities that we're going to just roll over and seize because they're there and we can do it. These forces are kind of just intermixed with Soviet soldiers. There is an encirclement in progress, and we're really going to try to clear our forces out of the east, as there's nothing to fight there, and move them to the west where things are getting a little bit murkier. Now, with that all said and done, as you can see, this situation, we're cleaning out some of the pockets. This is not ideal in the west. In the north, things are being pushed back fairly rapidly, although maybe not to the greatest extent possible. We're going to try to encircle this Soviet city from as many angles as we can, so that we can basically just ensure quick victory. We have rebels just throughout, although nothing too worrisome. There are some Soviet defenders, but we're just going to try to encircle them and race a few of our mechanized or armored units up to those cities up the Volga. These forces are going to just attack. We're doing fairly well there. We really want to take that city and defend the river so we can just keep all these enemy forces encircled and hopefully eventually destroy them. Our Marines are doing fairly poorly, and a lot of Soviet troops are being pulled back to defend. That's really going to be the worrying thing, is if all these Soviet forces, which we see going north of Crimea, are going to attack us, then we're going to need to draw forces over to defend that area, and the western part of this front is already the most at risk of collapsing. So, two things we have to do is, one, bring as many forces as we can over to this western portion to hopefully maintain what we have, and two, really just prevent the collapse of those troops. Some of these units are moving north, the rest are all moving west, and yeah, it's really up in the air how this is going to work. We do actually begin the attack that we had planned for last episode on the western forces. These troops are going to try to hold the area and maintain the pocket over all of these forces. Whether or not that's going to work remains to be seen, and it is a very risky venture as a lot of our armored and mechanized units are here, potentially very much at risk. A lot of Soviet forces are being pocketed around this area, which doesn't quite help those men, but is good in a general sense. These troops are pushing up, and might actually be able to push all the way up through this river and get that river defense that we had been wanting for quite some time, but never quite able to get. Meanwhile, here we're bringing more forces just around behind the Soviet lines. Down here things are going poorly, but everywhere else things are going alright. This western area of the front is probably the biggest risk, highest reward area. We did manage to re-encircle the Soviet forces though, which is very good. 5 of our new armored divisions are ready, so we're going to move them there and just reinforce them, or get them organized before sending them anywhere. Now the Soviet forces are re-encircled. Hopefully they'll eventually run out of supplies. Some of our forces are fighting losing battles, which we're probably going to have to retreat out of. We're going to use our Air Force as much as we possibly can, although we do have a bit of an issue with supplies getting to our armies, and that is very worrying, so we don't really want to stage any of our aircraft there. Meanwhile, all these advances continue on every other front. This area, the encirclement might be broken fairly soon, which is a terrible risk and a huge problem when it occurs, as that will give more supplies to these beleaguered Soviet troops. We race up to take these victory points with one group, everyone else is going to continue west. And in Crimea we begin a slight offensive. In Ukraine we're doing a slight offensive, which is going fairly well. The Germans are collapsing, as is kind of just their modus operandi at this point. This large, more or less pocketed Soviet force is still a humongous threat, probably as powerful as the forces we have encircling them, and then there's also the Soviets on the other side, which are just as threatening as them. So these forces are really going to be the bravest in our army, trying to defend there. We try to attack, and it fails. Okay, we've lost the encirclement, which is a terrible problem, and now those troops are themselves encircled. We race over to reattach our men to their supply lines and hopefully break the Soviets. In Ukraine, we are attacking. Alright, so, just generally throughout, let's take a moment, let's take a breather here. We just need to defend these forces. That's the main thing. If we're able to, as we just did, re-establish supply, the Soviets no longer have supply, things will be fine. And now the situation is a little bit closer to dire than I would like. We're going to try to defeat the Soviet forces wherever we possibly can, but it's a bit risky. We also begin advancing here. We might try to just encircle all of those Soviet armored and mechanized forces and bring those 5 additional armored units over. Alright, and the advance is working fairly well down here. These forces are in a decent thing resembling a line. It might not be ideal, and it might be fairly risky. Some of our forces are being forced to retreat. Others, though, are doing fine, and we do have the encirclement more or less taken care of. These forces are going to charge over, encircle those groups, and it looks as though that'll be fairly straightforward. And really, we will probably be able to succeed over here because of all the Soviet forces being pulled to the east. Here in the western part of the Eastern Front, we are facing a lot of resistance. Hopefully they'll be drawn back over to Ukraine by this rapid advance. And at any rate, we are holding the line. In Crimea, we've pressed forward. Over here, we're trying to press forward as much as we can. Up in the north, we're cleaning out the rest of the Soviet forces. And we might lose the encirclement again. Over here, we can hopefully get this encirclement taken care of pretty rapidly. It really depends. Now, a lot of our forces are terribly disorganized in the east. Everywhere else, we haven't really been fighting, so our forces are very well organized. Right here, they nearly broke the encirclement, but we managed to supply it at the last moment. We'll hopefully defeat that small Soviet force and win there. Now, we are fighting battles we can't really win just to delay the Soviets, and we got some reinforcements in, which will hopefully hold the encirclement. You'll notice that battle is not going very well. However, it's really all that we've got at this point. These encirclements are going fairly well. It looks like the Soviet unit is retreating. We'll get these armored units around. And Soviet units are attacking us in Crimea and over here. We're losing a lot of these battles or not really winning them simply because it's the strategic point, not the tactical, that matters right now. We can lose a few battles so long as we keep our troops in the field and do well with them. And as long as we keep encircling behind them, that should ultimately help. These forces have all been encircled, which is great. The Americans are pressing in India, which is bad. Up in the north, we're doing okay. Over here, we're getting a lot of troops in the area, more than we can supply, but hopefully enough to move forward. And we're going to try to collapse that encirclement, which appears to be going alright. We're moving more forces and trying to just delay the Soviet retreat. Right here, we're going to maybe lose a mechanized force. We try to resupply it as much as we can. We try to resupply them and tactically bomb the enemies around them. We're also trying to send a relieving column over to free them from the enemy encirclement. These forces are moving over to encircle Odessa. Hopefully we'll be able to win this battle. It might be very close. We managed to encircle and destroy a Soviet force. That force sadly did lose the battle, which is terrible. They have been captured by the Soviets in that pocket. Who only knows what will happen to them there. At any rate, that is just where they are right now. The encirclement still exists. We managed to encircle those forces and destroy that Soviet mechanized unit. We might be able to combine all of our fronts like we had wanted to do before. And we moved the front forward a little bit, which is great news. We went above and beyond the plan that we had set up for ourselves for this mission. We even advanced in the Ukraine, which we didn't plan for whatsoever, and even in Crimea. So that's all great. We've made great advances. We did lose some land, but it doesn't really matter as the people are encircled. The Germans are losing. They did make some minor gains, but they are losing overall. The Japanese retook all their losses. The Americans are pressing deeper into India. Britain is free and in just an African militia now. Apparently there's just a random arrow. Ultimately, though, we're doing a lot of damage to the Soviets. If we can keep up the momentum and not lose that attempt at encirclement, I'm fairly confident once that army is encircled, the encirclement destroyed, we will be in a much better point. We will hopefully be able to keep moving forward and destroy the Soviet Union. Thank you very much for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe. We'll be back tomorrow.